Howdy folks, welcome back to War Thunder with the Mighty Jingles. That's actually me playing. Yes, that's right, my connection. At 3 o'clock in the morning, when there's nobody else in my area using the cable, I can actually get a stable connection to War Thunder. It's pretty much the first time I've been able to play uninterrupted since patch 1.43 came out. And before we get on to the main event of today's video, I just wanted to show you some of the games I've had, or selected highlights of some of the games that I've had. This is the current special event for arcade battles that's running on the War Thunder Live server. It's the Battle of the Flak Panzers, all of the new and the old flak vehicles. And of course I don't have any of them unlocked because I haven't been able to play. So yep, I'm driving around in a shitty little tier 1 Flak Panzer. And of course everybody else is driving around in all the new machines that can one-shot me as soon as look at me, but hey, you've got to start somewhere. So I'm playing it cautious. And I pick up an AI kill and knock out one of the anti-aircraft guns to begin with. This was a very, very short game, by the way. I think it's the fastest game of War Thunder I have ever lost. Not much of a spoiler there. Basically, the entire team, well, the entire enemy team, rushed into the flag and then just sat there, and then they won. That was it. You know, no advanced tactics required. They just sat in the flag, and nobody on our team did a thing about it. Everybody just sort of sat around going, well, they're in the cap. Yep. Do you want to go and do something about it? Hell no, you're the curious one. You know? So, yeah, very, very, very fast game. But I did get to see something for the first time. One of the new features in patch 1.43 in War Thunder Arcade Ground Battles, the whole kill streak thing. And it really took me by surprise because I literally only killed 2 AI, and it unlocked the ability to jump into a fighter bomber. And there is the second AI. So that's 1 anti-aircraft emplacement and 1 AI tank. And bingo, now I can press my 8 key and jump into a fighter bomber. I'd never seen this before, so okay. And it took me a while to notice that it had actually popped up, but there we go. It gives you a 15-second warning, which presumably is 15 seconds to back your tank up into a safe position because your tank remains on the battlefield. And I'd never seen how this worked, so this was a first for me. And bingo, it's, oh, fantastic, Dauntless Dive Bomber, and it started me in a... Look at that. I couldn't be in a better position. All those targets lit up. Oh, surprise! You know, considering the fact that the entire enemy team were in anti-aircraft vehicles, not one of them paid the slightest bit of attention to the fact that I'd just blown 2 of them away. So, hooray! It does not give you long. Notice, bottom left corner of the screen, I only have 10 seconds left to fly this aircraft, and then it's back to the tank. But as it turns out, that wasn't just a double kill. That was also the final blow of the game, and that is how quickly this team lost that match. The results were, look at this, tier 1 Flak Panzer in a tier 4 match, and I'm the 3rd placed person on my team. Just, oh, hang your heads in shame. Well, anyway, from that I moved on to another arcade battle, but this time in aircraft, because one thing that I hadn't noticed when I was looking at patch 1.43 was that there's a new premium aircraft for the British. It's a Catalina. Oh, yes. And of course, as it's a premium aircraft, it comes by default, fresh out of the box, with all of the modifications unlocked, so you can jump into your first game in it with the 4x £1,000 bomb load, and just cruise around 4 kilometers up with absolutely nobody bothering you, nuking the bases from orbit, which is pretty much what I did for the first half of this game. Pretty boring to watch, typical bomber gameplay. But it wasn't long before I'd knocked out every single one of the supply bases and then was able to go for the airfield. And that's when the old black magic happened. Sometimes I really do wonder what's going through the minds of War Thunder Arcade players. Every single one of their supply bases has just been knocked out by somebody called Jingles in a Catalina. There's only one thing left for me to bomb, their airfield. It's not like they can't see me. I mean, I'm right there. Look at this. Oh, we'll be perfectly safe on the runway. This never gets old, no matter how many times I do it. And it, come on, yeah, it's a £1,000 bomb, you don't need to be accurate. And there's one, and there's two. I don't know why it's funny, but it is. Yeah, we're just going to land here to repair. I'm sure we'll be fine. That Catalina's an airside, right? Nope. Well, the Cat eventually took its own weight in 7.7mm machine gun bullets and went down. So I jumped into the Havoc. I thought I'll just nail that destroyer on the way in, and then I'll reload the bombs and finish off the airbase. But the game ended before I got to the airbase. However, did you notice that when I was flying around at low altitude, circling the enemy airfield in the Catalina, there was a Bf-110 down there? The Bf-110's got some serious firepower, 20mm cannons. Was he going after me? Or was he going after the Reserve Fury biplane, who posed absolutely no threat whatsoever to his team, and who was not, unlike me, busy winning the game? Yep, he was going for the biplane. War Thunder Arcade. Always predictable. But, you know, I've missed this. I really have. And with any luck, the cable in my area should be fully upgraded within a week, 10 days at the most. And I'll actually be able to, you know, get back into playing War Thunder and World of Tanks whenever I want, instead of having to lurk around until 3 o'clock in the morning on a weekend when there's nobody else in the area using the cable. So, yeah, fingers crossed. And that was it for my misadventures back in War Thunder after God knows how long not playing. So, enough of me derping around. We're going to move on to today's main feature, which is Total Recoil flying the Mitsubishi A6M50 in the Defense of Iwo Jima realistic battle event in War Thunder. This can be a tough one for the Japanese to win. Obviously, their fighter aircraft start off on the ground. American bomber aircraft start off in the air. So it can be a tough job for the Japanese to actually manage to climb to altitude to intercept the bombers before they make it to the island. The Japanese can lose if all of their player aircraft are shot down, and if the American landing craft reach the beaches in sufficient numbers. They also have the secondary mission of protecting the AI dive bombers that are attacking the American fleet. So while Total Recoil is navigating his way towards the combat area, we're going to talk a bit about the history of this remarkable aircraft. The Japanese began World War II with one weapon in particular that gave them a decisive advantage during their first 6 months' rampage across the Pacific. This was the Zero fighter, the Mitsubishi A6M series of carrier-borne fighter aircraft. In the hands of a well-trained Japanese pilot, it gave the Imperial Japanese Navy complete air superiority in its wave of conquest. In reality, although it did have a number of advantages, it had significant limitations as well, and Allied pilots soon took the measure of it, and it slowly declined from a master of the skies to a suicide craft. On the 19th of May 1937, the Imperial Japanese Navy issued a request for a new fighter. The performance specifications included 2 7.7mm machine guns, twin 20mm cannon, it had to be capable of carrying 2 60-kilo bombs, and it had to be fitted with state-of-the-art radio gear. The specifications were considered so aggressive that many people thought there was no way the Japanese aircraft manufacturers could possibly meet them. Both the Nakajima and the Mitsubishi companies entered the competition. Nakajima dropped out very, very early on, considering that the specifications really were impossible to meet. Mitsubishi pressed on, however, and assigned chief designer Jiro Horokishi the task of designing the new fighter. The result was the A6M1, or Naval Fighter Mitsubishi Design No. 6 Variant 1, which first flew on the 1st of April 1939 with test pilot Katsuzo Shima at the controls. The initial prototype was fitted with the Mitsubishi Zusai 13 engine, which had 780 horsepower. This gave it a top speed of 490 km per hour, which was under the specification required, but in all other respects the aircraft actually managed to meet the standards. A second A6M1 was flown in October 1939, but it was lost in March 1940 when it exploded in mid-air, killing the test pilot. A third prototype had already been flown in January 1940, with the designation A6M2. This aircraft was fitted with a more powerful Nakajima NK-1C Sakai 12 radial engine, which had 925 horsepower, giving the new fighter a top speed of 535 km per hour, which exceeded the performance specifications. The new fighter was pushed into service trials throughout the first half of 1940, leading to combat trials in China and initial production. It was formally designated the Type 0 carrier fighter Reishiki Kanjo Sentoku Model 11, but it became informally known as the Zero Sentoku, or simply the Zero Sen. Interestingly, and something that I didn't realise until I actually started looking into the history of this aircraft, is that when you see the Zero referred to as the Zero Raisen, it's simply because the Japanese use a lot of imported words, zero being one of them, and the traditional Japanese word for the number zero, Rai, with the abbreviation for fighter, Sen. And that's where the name comes from, the Zero Raisen. It basically just means the Zero fighter aircraft. We're going to put the history lesson on hold for a moment, however, because Total Recall has just engaged in his first spot of aerial combat with enemy fighters. And these are Mustangs. This is not going to be easy. He doesn't just have to worry about the Mustangs, of course. He's dogfighting over the enemy fleet, so he's constantly being fired at by AAA batteries as well. He also has to worry about all the flak, but check this guy out. Mustang going into a climb, low on speed, nice easy target. Couldn't have asked for a better opportunity. Lovely. There's his first kill. Narrowly avoids the Corsair. Of course, in the climb, he lost a lot of speed as well. He's now at his most vulnerable. Going after the XP-50 there. One of his wingmen's just been shot down. Well, he's on fire. He's probably not going to recover from that. No self-sealing fuel tanks on the Zero. He's managed to catch. There's the Corsair. Oh, lovely. Corsair can take a lot of punishment, though. But look at this flying. Look at that. I mean, the Corsair's in all kinds of problems, but that is... Look at this. There's just a big follow the leader going on here with a whole bunch of aircraft all shooting at the aircraft in front of them. He's on the tail of another Mustang. Somebody's on his 6 as well. This is looking very, very dangerous. He doesn't want to give up the chase on this Mustang, but at the same time there's a guy on his tail. The Mustang's trying to outturn him at low altitude. Very, very bad idea. Yep. Zeros were always at their most manoeuvrable at low altitude and low speed. The controls tended to get very, very heavy at high speed. And it took a while, there's the XP-50 again, for American pilots to realise the tactics that they needed to use to beat the Zeros, even when they were using inferior aircraft like the Brewster Buffalo and the Wildcat. That XP-50's taken some serious damage. He just cannot shake Total Recoil. He's not the only one on his tail. There's another guy going in there. Total Recoil's got to be careful he doesn't hit his wingman. Still has the flak to worry about as well. Loops over, inverts. We're going to talk about that as well, actually. Very important when you were flying the Zero to try to not incur any negative Gs. If you were going to bob down, it was always better to roll the aircraft and invert it, and we'll discuss the reasons for that, why, when we get a quiet moment. There, he's got the XP-50. Pilots managed to bail out. One of the biggest lucky breaks that the Americans got during the early stages of the Pacific War was when they captured a mostly intact Zero that had been flown by 19-year-old Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga during a raid on the Aleutian Islands. He'd been hit by anti-aircraft fire, which had severed his fuel line, and he wasn't going to be able to make it back to his carrier. So he decided to ditch the aircraft on a nearby island that had been designated as an emergency landing strip. There was a Japanese submarine standing off the island, ready to assist downed pilots. Unfortunately, he thought he was landing in a meadow, and it turned out to actually be a marsh. His landing gear got stuck, the aircraft flipped over and broke his neck, killing him. But the aircraft was almost completely undamaged. Now, the Japanese pilots had been warned never to let a Zero fall into the hands of the enemy. But his wingmen were reluctant to shoot up his downed aircraft because they didn't know whether he was alive or not. And so they flew off just hoping, he was going to make it. He was actually dead. He'd broken his neck. 5 weeks later, a Catalina was on a patrol when it spotted the Zero. landed off the island, sent the crew ashore to have a look, and couldn't believe their luck. They recovered a mostly intact Zero. The first time Americans had actually managed to get their hands on this aircraft that was the terror of the skies in the Pacific. When they eventually got it back to San Diego and had a look at it, they discovered a number of interesting things about the Zero. While it was definitely a uniquely Japanese design, it did incorporate a lot of foreign technology. The propellers were straight copies of Hamilton Standard propellers, an American design, which was quite handy because the propeller of the captured Zero had been damaged. They just went out and bought a new one. The 7.7mm machine guns were licence-built copies of British Vickers machine guns. The 20mm cannons were licence-built copies of Swiss Oerlikon cannons. They soon learned that the engine of the Zero wasn't actually that good, and the only reason it was such a fast and manoeuvrable aircraft was because it had no armour and no self-sealing fuel tanks. But more importantly, they discovered certain things about the way the engine operated under certain conditions that allowed them to develop the initial tactics which would allow inferior aircraft like the Wildcat, like the Brewster Buffalo, to at least hold their own, if not outperform the Zero. And one of those things was what I mentioned earlier. They discovered that because the Zero had a float-type carburetor, if the pilot of the Zero pulled the nose up and then pushed it down again, the engine would stall. The Zero also rolled far easier to the left than it did to the right, which meant that if an American pilot found a Zero on its tail, one thing that he could do to get away from it was to pull the nose of the aircraft up, then down again, go into a dive, and turn to the right. The Zero on his tail would try to follow his movement, his engine would stall, and he wouldn't be able to follow him in the turn. And that's why, as you saw Total Recall doing numerous times throughout the course of this battle, if you had to put the Zero into a dive, it was always better to roll inverted to the left and pull back on the stick. That way you were always imposing positive Gs on the aircraft rather than negative Gs, which would cause the carburetor to give up and the engine to stall. Meanwhile, returning back to the battle, Total Recall here is feeling justifiably proud of himself. He's gotten 4 kills in a realistic battle, flying the A6M50 against technically superior aircraft. He's bringing it back to land on Iwo Jima, repair the minimal damage that he's taken, rearm his weapons, go up again. There's still a couple of American pilots in the air, and that's when he runs into the most overpowered bush in the Pacific. And yes, he was kicking himself when that happened. Oh dear. But yes, the glory days of the Zero couldn't last forever. With the introduction of more advanced American fighters like the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, Grumman F-6F Hellcat, and the Vought F-4U Corsair, which weren't only more powerful and tough aircraft, but they were built in numbers the Japanese just couldn't even hope to match, the Zero lost the advantage. It still had the edge of manoeuvrability, but American pilots were far too wise by now than to get suckered into a turning fight, and always made the most of their superior speed, toughness and firepower. The Zero had become a second-rate fighter. To make matters worse, combat attrition was eliminating the Japanese Navy's best pilots, and they just couldn't provide adequate training to the number of replacements that they needed. Japanese pilots, at one time very experienced and confident, were becoming as second-rate as the aircraft they were flying, and were increasingly outmatched by Allied pilots who had learned the trade the hard way. So that was Total Recoil, doing quite well, it has to be said, in the legendary A6M5 Zero Sen Mitsubishi Imperial Japanese Navy carrier-based naval fighter. 4 kills, realistic battle, defense of Iwo Jima, before coming to an inglorious and sticky end at the hands of the most overpowered bush in the Pacific in War Thunder. I hope you enjoyed the video, folks. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.